Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining today's web conference, Training for the Generator Contingency and RAS Modeling. Please note that all participant lines will be muted until the Q&A portions of the call. We will provide you with instructions on how to ask a verbal question at those times. If you require technical assistance, please send a private note to the event producer via the chat panel located on the lower right-hand side of your screen. Or you can call our help desk at 888-796-6118. With that, I'll turn the call over to Radha Madrigal. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Bob. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're here to talk about the changes coming with the implementation of the Generator Contingency and Remedial Action Scheme Modeling Initiative, which we fondly refer to as GCARM. Before we get started, we'll do a quick round of introductions so you know who you're speaking with on this side of the room. My name is Radha Madrigal, and I'm with the External Trading and Readiness Department.
Ginger Quintavala, I'm with Customer Experience.
Terry Servideo with Policy.
Jim McLean with the CR Group.
Thank you, everyone. In an effort to increase transparency and provide greater service to our stakeholders, we are recording this webinar. It will be posted on our website so that you can review it in the future, and for those who were not able to join today's call. For those of you who are following along on the call, these slides are posted on CAISO.com and can be found in the ISO Learning Center under the New Releases section, and also on the Release Planning page if you go down to the Fall 2018 Release section and look for the GCARM heading. Today I'll be sharing with you the purpose of the GCARM initiative and what it applies to. I'll also go into more detail about when it's happening, what's changing, and why we are making these changes. We'll then discuss how this benefits the market and how your organization can prepare for these changes through our market simulation activities. The purpose of the GCARM initiative is to enhance the ISO market's security-constrained economic dispatch models, we refer to this as SCED, to include the potential loss of individual generators and to model remedial action schemes, or RAS. A RAS is designed to automatically disconnect generators or load in the event of an unexpected loss of service of a transmission line to prevent system overload. These enhancements apply both to the day-ahead and the real-time markets, as well as the congestion revenue rights allocation and auction process. The CRR model needs to mimic as closely as possible the day-ahead market constraints, so incorporating GCARM constraints into the CRR model helps with revenue adequacy. As part of this initiative, EIM entities will have the option to have the ISO model generator contingencies and RAS in their balancing areas. The market simulation window for GCARM is from September 17th to October 31st. Structured simulation will begin on September 26th. We'll talk more about market simulation toward the end of the presentation. The target date for these enhancements to be activated in production is February 1st, 2019. Let's go into more detail about what is changing. The security-constrained economic dispatch is the optimization engine used to run the market functions to determine the optimal dispatch instructions consistent with resource and transmission constraints. This initiative enhances that dispatch to model a number of new items: generation or load loss, transmission loss along with subsequent generation or load loss due to RAS operation, and transmission reconfiguration due to RAS operations. In addition, the congestion component of the locational marginal price, or LMP, will be updated so that it considers the cost of positioning the system to account for generator contingencies and RAS operations. A RAS-connected generator will potentially receive higher energy prices than generators that are not connected to a RAS at the same bus because a RAS-connected generator does not contribute to binding emergency limits. While under certain scenarios the generator may receive a higher price for its energy, the constraint allows the dispatch to potentially use less expensive generation, reducing overall production cost. Here's more detail specifically related to contingencies. A generator contingency is the potential loss of a generator. GCARM enhances the day-ahead market, the real-time market, and the energy imbalance market to support generator contingencies. An N-1 preventive constraint enables the market to model and price the immediate impact of RAS operation on the transmission system. N-1 stands for normal -1, which is a way for the electric system to operate in a redundant manner that allows for one thing to go wrong and we're still able to operate normally. These enhancements to the economic dispatch will respect all emergency limits after the loss of a generating unit or after RAS operation without the need for out-of-market intervention. It does not focus on system response and state after the loss of a generating unit, along with the subsequent deployment of contingency reserves. The purpose of GCARM is to be within line limits after the loss of a generator. Essentially, what are my transmission line flows right after the event? It is not designed to replace or change the procurement of ancillary services. Let's walk through some examples of this modeling. First, we'll discuss generator contingency, which is the potential loss of a generator. GCARM will model the pickup effect of the system for a generator loss. This will be consistent with reliability studies for generator loss. It will be consistent with the ISO operator's real-time contingency analysis tool, and it will incorporate the potential change in electrical flows into locational marginal prices. In this illustration, the loss of generation output from Gen 1 is spread to the other online resources, which we've identified as Gen System, to model transmission line flows. The LMP for Gen 1 considers flows on line 1 due to the pickup by Gen System. If there is congestion on line 1, the LMP at Gen 1 will reflect this congestion. This example illustrates how a generator which is part of a RAS will trip off if a line is lost. In this image, Gen 1 is part of a RAS and will trip off if line 1 or line 2 goes out. Gen 2 is not part of a RAS. As part of determining the LMP for Gen 1, the model considers that Gen 1 will not overload line 1 or line 2 if they go out, because the RAS will automatically disconnect Gen 1 if either line is lost. The fact that Gen 1 is part of a RAS allows for a higher transfer capability to be modeled in the market. So what is the reason we're making this change? This initiative enhances the ISO market's modeling. Today, the ISO market models the potential unexpected loss of transmission lines to ensure that electrical flows do not exceed transmission system limits, but it does not model the potential unexpected loss of a generator. Today, we only have limited means to account for remedial action schemes, and we do not explicitly model them. Because of this, the ISO operators must manage the potential for generator contingencies and remedial action schemes, mostly through manual actions. Now that we've covered the what and the why, let's talk about how these changes benefit the market. Including the unexpected loss of a generator and remedial action schemes in the ISO market model will improve market efficiency and transparency by reducing out-of-market actions. These are the grid operators' manual actions I mentioned on the previous slide. The enhanced modeling will more appropriately reflect congestion in locational marginal prices, improving generator dispatch. And it will also allow the market to more fully utilize generation that is part of a RAS. Before we move on to discuss market simulation, what questions do you have? Bob, at this time, if you wouldn't mind checking for questions from the audience.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, as we move on to Q&A, please feel free to place yourself into the question queue by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please then state your name and your question. Okay, we do have a couple of questions that came in. Caller, your line is now unmuted. Please state your name and your question.
Hi, this is Jonathan Neal from PowerX. I had a question regarding what changes there's going to be to the CAISO full network model that's used in the CRR auction to account for these new RAS schemes and generator contingencies.
Yeah, hi Jonathan, this is Jim. So the model itself will not change. This will effectively be the modeling of a new constraint. So as we provide for you guys today in our MP data release files, the list of the constraints that will be enforced in the model, we will provide the list of the GCARM constraints also that will be enforced.
So you provide a list of contingencies and then you provide a list of monitored facilities. Are you referring to new contingencies or new monitored facilities?
New contingencies.
Okay, thank you.
GCARM is just a special class of a contingency, basically.
That makes sense to me for the RAS schemes, but for the generator contingencies themselves, because the full network model doesn't actually include, that kind of detail, I have a hard time envisioning how a generator contingency will be displayed in the current contingency framework.
Do you have a question?
So this is Perry. Is this a question about a generator contingency?
Yes.
Or a RAS contingency?
I think the RAS, I can envision how that would appear in the current contingencies file, but so this question is more specific to the generator contingencies.
Well, whenever they define the contingency definition, they're going to say, define which breakers open and all of that. Do you get that level of detail with the normal contingency set today?
Is this for me or for Jim?
Can we go on mute for just a sec?
Yes.
Absolutely. Just a moment, please. Okay.
Sorry, Jonathan, we had to have a little offline there. So I think maybe I was misunderstanding the question here. You're asking about not whether we're going to include GCARM constraints, the transmission line and generator contingencies, but you're saying also a generator just tripping, just a generator being removed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and basically the way that this process was defined or is going to be set up is it's just a transfer of that generation output to another location, right? So I think was your concern that you can't disconnect the generator if you've already got fixed injections, withdrawals, all that stuff?
Yeah, I just don't see
Maybe
how.
I didn't understand.
I guess the part of this initiative it says is going to be included in CRR process, and I just don't understand how you could incorporate a generator contingency into the CRR simultaneous feasibility test.
So it's basically the process is just making sure that if we have a contingency that trips the generator, that generator output can be taken up by other generators, right? And not create any overloads, any other transmission overloads on the system.
Is the question can the software today do it versus what we're implementing? What we're implementing is that the software will pick up the lost generation and spread it to the other generation nodes on the system in the CRR model. based on a predefined set of generation distribution factors, similar to the load distribution factors. Is the question like the mechanics of how it'll work, or how you're going to see the contingency itself?
It was kind of both, actually. One is the transparency going to be there to define every contingency, or is that just going to say every generator?
I know. There'll be a set list of contingencies to use in a certain month in the CRR model.
Okay, and those are going to be,
is that
going to be a new contingency file?
Yeah, we'll have to think about how the format is going to be put out there, but we will provide you those lists of specific contingencies that we will be enforcing.
Okay, great. I look forward to seeing that new format.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that, Jonathan. I misunderstood what you were asking.
No problem.
Thanks.
Okay, we do have another question in the queue. Caller, your line has been unmuted. Please state your name and your question.
Hi, good morning. This is Sanman Rokade from Pacific Corp. My question here is, when you guys are talking about modeling the RAS, I expect the expectations from the EIM entities is that they would provide you the full details of what the RAS definition is in their areas, correct?
Yeah, this is Perry. The way that we set up the policy and the tariff provision that we're working on is that they would share the contingencies that they wish to enforce in their area through the same way that they would share contingencies that they want to enforce in their areas today. We would use that whatever that process is that exists, we'd use that same way. So you guys would define the contingency definition or work with the ISO operations engineers on defining the contingency definition and then communicate whether it'll be enforced in the market or not.
So for example, if line X trips, then that will immediately result in generation A tripping with that. So something to that effect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So there is a follow-up question there because in our real-time operations, most of our RASs are not, or we hope they are simple as that, but they are unfortunately not as simple and straightforward. Most of them come with predetermined set points where the generators get armed based on flows, the status of devices, equipment online, and so on. So how is the GCAR or this initiative going to take into account the arming of the RAS schemes which are tied to specific generators? Because in certain situations, depending on the flows on the system, the RAS schemes are not armed all the time. They only get armed for certain outage scenarios, or they get armed for certain preset flows on paths or transmission lines or whatnot. So how is this initiative going to take into account the arming of RAS schemes?
Right. So we had the same discussion through the stakeholder process because there's a lot of RAS schemes in California that do the similar sort of arming logic. What we worked through in the stakeholder process was the scenario that the RAS is there to protect you for, the real-life RAS is there to protect you for, is the same scenario that the contingency is going to protect you for also. So whether or not flows are on a line or, you know, approaching some level that arms the RAS is SCED's indifferent to that. It just says, I'm going to dispatch the cheapest generation to solve this problem. If that cheapest generation happens to be the stuff that would put flows above the arming level, this contingency will catch that. So you see, the contingency protects for the scenario that the RAS was there to protect for anyway. So if the RAS is designed right, then the way that the contingency works is we could say, assume it's armed, drop that generation in SCED, and the dispatch that you would get would be one that would put you into the armed scenario in real life.
So would it always assume that the RAS scheme is armed? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and that's if we have it enabled. Now, that's not to say there aren't even more super complicated ones. I read the white papers on your Jim Bridger RAS. I'm not sure this will handle all that, but that's why we want to have that back and forth with the operations engineers and your engineers on trying to figure out the right contingency definition, which then we would share, with the market and get it incorporated into SCAD.
Okay, and early on in the presentation I heard when generators which are defined as part of a RAS scheme, the prices on that would be higher as compared to the other gen system, to use the same lingo as defined in the slides. So if the gens are not, if the RAS schemes are not armed, would the generators still receive higher prices?
If the dispatch, so remember that it's the dispatch that's controlling everything. If the dispatch puts you in a scenario where the RAS would not be armed, then likely it would be that contingency is also not binding in SCAD. So the contingency is not binding in SCAD, you won't see the price separation between two generators at the same bus, one on RAS and one not on RAS.
Okay. Yeah, I would definitely be looking forward to have the operational discussion with the ISO operations team on that. And I just had one last question on the same topic, is if the contingency which would initiate a RAS action is outside the EIM footprint, by that I mean it's in a non-EIM BA, how is the ISO planning to account for that?
Yeah, so we're not planning on modeling RASs or generation drops that are outside of the footprint.
No. I'm saying that the generation, if the generation is tied into an EIM entity's BA, but the generation trigger action or the contingency which triggers that generation to drop is in a non-EIM BA. So if that contingency
like a line loss outside of the EIM.
Correct.
Outside of the EIM footprint, causing the loss of one of your generators internal.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that one. I think if we had George here, he might have some views on that. That one's tricky because we have the rules about what we're allowed to have in the optimization in terms, for what we reflect in congestion in different areas. That one kind of walks that line. That's a good question, though. Let's maybe follow up on that one.
Yeah, if you could, that would be really great, and I'll make a note of it at my end as well. So in any further conversations, I'll make sure that we get an answer to this. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thanks.
I am seeing no further questions in the queue at this time.
Okay, thank you, Bob. We'll go ahead and move on. So talking about market simulation now, market simulation will begin on Monday, September 17th for unstructured scenarios. Structured simulation will begin on September 26th. Market sim will conclude on Friday, October 31st. The purpose of Market Sim is to run through a series of structured scenarios that provide customers with the ability to preview and test the new functionality before it is implemented in the production environment. The scenarios list what the ISO will do and what the EIM and ISO market participants will do, along with the expected outcome and the anticipated settlement outcome. I've provided a link in the reference section to the structured scenarios, which go into each of the scenarios in detail. There are 2 scenarios in total. We have one for the day-ahead market and one for the real-time market. The scenarios are designed to run through the process of submitting bids, viewing results and prices, and seeing how that data flows to your settlement statement. I recommend that you review these scenarios before the start of Market Sim to become familiar with what will occur. Also, as part of this initiative, a new frequency response flag, which is a yes or no attribute, will be added to the network model data for all generating resources. This flag, which is at the physical resource level, shall be yes for all generating resources that satisfy these conditions, that the generating resource has a frequency response governor, and that the frequency response governor is activated. We are targeting implementation of the GCARM project on February 1st, 2019. To correctly perform contingency analysis at the time of implementation, frequency response capability data is required for all generators. The ISO will source this frequency capability data for all generators from WEC. After implementation, new and existing generators will communicate their FR data changes to the ISO through established processes. If it is a new generator, it will be done through the interconnection process, and if it is an established generator, then it will be done through an update to the resource information in the master file. Before we leave you today, Bob, let's check to see if there are any more questions from the audience.
All right. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, pressing #2 on your telephone keypad will indicate that you have a question. And we do have a question that came in. Caller, your line has been unmuted. Please state your name and your question.
From TGE. I do have a question regarding to the structure scenario. So in the ISO action, you say that you're going to share among the contingency names, and we would like to, with the market participants, and we would like to know how many days ahead will you be able to share the contingency name and definition, so we can identify the resource and doing the testing. So right now, this is like, was that you're going to conduct it on September 26th, and we request that at least give us 1 or 2 business days prior to when you're running this model, so we can identify some resource to bid into the market.
Yeah. So right now, this is Perry. The engineers are working really hard to find RAS contingencies that will likely inform the structured scenario. I think the last that I heard, they were not yet willing to commit to at least 2 business days, but they're working on it. That's what they're aspiring to. They couldn't commit, though.
Oh, they could not commit. What about one business day?
Not at this time.
Okay. All right.
I don't know. I don't have them in the room. I just know they couldn't commit to.
We'll take this as Ginger. We will take that to them and tell them it is critically important and you're requesting it.
Good, Ginger. Yeah, I did also send the request to Adam as well, and I believe he's waiting for the response. I think maybe this is a good time for me to ask that again. Thank you.
Okay, and we do have another caller with a question. Caller, your line has been unmuted. Please state your name and your question.
Hi, this is Jonathan Neal from PowerX again with one more question regarding the CRR auction. I was wondering, this stakeholder is going to start February 1st of next year. When will these changes take place in the CRR auction? I'm assuming that, will we see them in this year's annual auction or not?
Yeah, Jonathan, that's a good question, because we needed to clarify that the date there is driven off of when we can get the software updated in the CR system. It is not going to make it in time for the annual, so it will not be included in the annual process. What we're trying to do is get it into the monthly processes as soon as we can, but right now it's kind of based on delivery from the vendor, and we have the vendor working on the CR1A and 1B stuff right now. So we will update you guys. At this point, the 2-1 date in my mind was really 2-1 for the March process, meaning that we'll start it on February 1st to get it in there for the March allocation and auction. But we will provide an update as we get closer to knowing exactly when we will get that in place. But it is, to answer your other question, it is not going to happen for the annual process.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying.
You bet.
Okay, I am not seeing any further questions in the question queue. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, pressing #2 on your telephone keypad will indicate that you have a question. And I am currently not seeing any other questions at this time.
All right. The end of the slide deck contains reference material. You'll see a link to the BRS and the market simulation structured scenarios. There's also a link to the Stakeholder Initiative page, which contains all of the documents related to the policy and tariff development for this initiative. I often include a list of acronyms here in the reference section, but the BRS already has a nice list of acronyms in the appendix, so if you're looking for that, please direct your attention to the BRS. As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, these slides are posted on CAISO.com and can be found on our Learning Center or on the release planning page under the 2018 fall release in the GCARM section. Thank you for your participation in today's call, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for joining today's conference. The session has now concluded. You may disconnect.